Alright, so we won the die roll, which is nice. And pretty medium hand here. We've got a 1-drop in Swift Spear. Probe. We've also got 4 lands. I think it's like a close hand that I'm gonna keep, but it's not like a happy keep. It's just, okay, I'm gonna keep, hope to draw spells, or something optimally like a Faithless Looting. Ways to put cards in our graveyard quickly. Next turn, we're probably going to want to fire off this Gitaxian Probe to see what's going on. There's a Windswept Heath. And interestingly, we drew a Sleight of Hand, so we can actually just start on Sleight of Hand if we want to, which I kind of like doing. And so we're going to put the Serum Visions into our hand. And now we can cast the Serum Visions. And it may be that we just don't fire off the Gitaxian Probe until next turn. So we drew a Thing in the Ice. So got another Thing in the Ice on top, which we're going to bottom. We also have a copy of Temur Battle Rage, which we can keep. And gonna battle now with a 3/4 Monastery Swift Spear. And next turn, we're probably gonna want to get this Thing in the Ice into play. It's not one of our most explosive draws, but it could get the job done. It just depends what our opponent is up to. So we're just gonna attack with the Swift Spear, play Thing in the Ice, and pass the turn here. And we're slow rolling the Gitaxian Probe a little bit because we want to probe the turn that we cast the Battle Rage, and it looks like our opponent did have a removal spell. So we're actually not that upset about our Thing in the Ice going away. It means we're realistically quite close to this Bedlam Reveler, and it looks like our opponent could potentially be playing an Abzan deck of some sort. We'll see. Possibly Abzan Company, since we're seeing Eternal Witness now, to get back this Path to Exile. So we've got some decisions to make here in terms of what we want to do for the turn. Drew a Kiln Fiend, which is a pretty good draw. And our opponent might just chump block with Eternal Witness on our Swift Spear. Alright, just gonna go ahead and hard cast the Probe here. See what we hit, what we see off of this Probe. So, yep, it is Abzan Company. There's a Coco, a Pride Mage, a Path, and then 3 lands. So we have the option here of going for a decently big Temur Battle Rage, and I think we do want to. So that's going to mean firing off the Mutagenic Growth first. So we're going to go down to 18, cast the Mutagenic Growth. Now our Swift Spear is a 5/6, and we're actually, it looks like, going to be able to deal 11 here, bring our opponent all the way down to 2, and follow up with a Kiln Fiend. So, yep, our opponent's at 2. And we're in a pretty good spot because next turn we're just going to play this Bedlam Reveler and refuel our hand. We have 5 instants and sorceries now in our graveyard. So our opponent now has access to Collecting Company, or potentially a different play while leaving up Path to Exile. We'll see which of those 2 options our opponent elects to go with here, but pretty happy with our spot at the moment. Okay, so it looks like Scavenging Ooze and leaving up Path to Exile mana. So we drew Thing in the Ice, which we can play, but we can also not play the Thing in the Ice, which I kind of like more. Just so we have 2 mana available for our turn. So, just going to cast the Bevel and Reveler, and it is going to mean discarding the Thing in the Ice, but wasn't really going to do us too much. Pretty good draw here. So, we are going to fire off this Jataxian Probe, make our creatures bigger. And so, yep, we see that path, the Pride Mage, and the Company, which we already knew about. And now we can just attack with both of our guys. And our opponent's in a pretty rough spot, considering we've got this Temur Battle Rage as basically our last business spell. So if our opponent just blocks here, we don't have to do anything. Our opponent's forced to make a move. Now our opponent's targeting our Swiftspear with a path, but we can now fire the Temur Battle Rage off on the Kiln Fiend, and that's going to be lethal here. So, alright, sweet. Our deck did what it was supposed to do. And we were able to take down the first game there. Now, Malira Company happens to be a matchup where we don't need to sideboard all that much. The cards that we can think about, Blood Moon, it is okay because they're a 3-color deck, but they also have Mana Dorks, so not a huge fan of Blood Moon in general here. Grafdigger's Cage is pretty good because it shuts off the companies and the chords. Dispel is similar in that it can shut off the chords and the companies. The issue is that we don't want to board in too many cards that don't help with our primary game plan. But I think we still want to board these cards in. And we can shave on Mutagenic Growth. It's a card that often gets cut a little bit after board. Dispel, by the way, also counters Path, which is pretty important as well. So yeah, I think we can... Mutagenic Growth is one of the cards we can look at cutting. Thing in the Ice actually could be a card we could cut, but just going to cut the Mutagenic Growths. Well, we want to keep it a critical mass of creatures. Don't really need the third Bedlam Reveler here, so I think our plan is reasonable. Mutagenic Growth is one of those cards that it's like one of the weaker cards in these pump spell oriented decks, but it normally makes the main deck, but then after board your opponent has more interaction. You want to be less all in on cards like Temur Battle Rage. So we do have a multiple Thing in the Ice draw. I think I'm going to keep this hand. It's definitely got some flaws to it in that we've got 3 2-drop creatures. And we drew a 1-drop creature, which is nice. So we can start with that. We don't have a ton in the way of spells, but we'll see what we can do. Hopefully we can get up to 4. Flipping Thing in the Ice against Malira Company isn't as great as it is against some other decks, but it's still pretty powerful. Here's a Tide Hollow Sculler, so we'll see what our opponent elects to take here from our hand. I could see arguments for the Manamorphose. The Kiln Fiend is a pretty good threat, but it looks like Apostle's Blessing is going to be the card. So we're going to attack first, so that if our opponent blocks, we can Manamorphose here. And it looks like no blocks, which makes a lot of sense. And getting it in basic Mountain off the Tarn, because we could get basic Island off Misty if we want to. And now we have the option of which of our 2-drops to deploy, but I think I like going with Thing in the Ice here. And Thing in the Ice is going to mean that we're playing towards a little bit of a longer game, essentially. So here's a Scavenging Ooze coming down for our opponent. But thanks to the Thing in the Ice, it means our Thing in the Ice can block Tide Hollow Sculler, so pretty unlikely that our opponent makes any attacks here. Although this 1 white mana up is a little bit suspicious, representing Path to Exile, essentially. Alright, so here is a Sleight of Hand, huh? Alright, I think what we may want to do is just deploy our second copy of Thing in the Ice and just play for a longer game involving potentially flipping both Thing in the Ices here. So that means we can play the Thing in the Ice first and then follow up with Sleight of Hand. And this means that both Thing in the Ices would potentially flip on the same turn. And we see 2 pump spells, or 2 non-creature spells, but think Serum Visions is probably the one we want here. So, yep, gonna grab the Visions. And we can actually get in with the Swift Spear if we want to, which I kind of like doing. And, alright, so our opponent's just going to take the damage. Now, we actually, next turn, potentially could flip a Thing in the Ice. So our opponent's firing a path on one of them. And we actually, now, after that path, only have 1 basic left in our deck. 1 basic island, and I wonder if our opponent's thinking about that at all. But our opponent is representing Collected Company here, which we have to be aware of. So let's start on the Serum Visions, and we'll see what we find lurking on top of our deck here for us. So we drew a Grafdigger's Cage, and there's a Bolt that we want to keep on top. And now what we can do is actually play this Grafdigger's Cage, which is going to force our opponent to react and potentially cast Collected Company now. So yep, that is what we're seeing here. So Collected Company has, looks like, just found a Kitchen Fix. Interesting. So we could flip the Thing in the Ice right now, or try to wait until our next turn to flip it. We know about the Bolt on top of our deck. So if we Manamorphose now, we could Bolt our opponent and attack with the Thing in the Ice, which doesn't seem like the worst. At the same time, though, I kind of like waiting until next turn. We could even end of turn, end of our opponent's turn, flip Thing in the Ice. So I think what we want to do here is actually just kind of gamble that our opponent does not have a removal spell. And if our opponent blocks like this is a pretty interesting block. So we can order in such a way to kill 2 of our opponent's creatures and flip Thing in the Ice if we want to. So the question now becomes, do we want to flip Thing in the Ice here? So the Kitchen Finks, remember, because of the Grafdigger's Cage, it is not going to be able to persist. But I think we want to get rid of the Scavenging Ooze and possibly this Tide Hollow Sculler as well. So we're going to order blockers. The Finks and the Ooze we can put first. And then the Sculler comes after. I think I like that. And now we're just going to fire this Manamorphose off. This is going to bring our Thing in the Ice down to 1 counter. And now we can just go to damage. There's really no reason. We're pretty happy with the way these blocks are going. We're killing 2 of our opponent's creatures, and we've still got this Thing in the Ice, which we can flip basically whenever we want to, assuming that our opponent doesn't have removal. So our opponent is taking damage from this Temple Garden. So here's an Eternal Witness. So it may be that, yep, so Path to Exile is going to be the card that our opponent gets back, which is pretty annoying. It gets rid of our Thing in the Ice. So that kind of sucks. But now we're up against our opponent's 1 card in hand. And we've got Kiln Fiend and Lightning Bolt. So it's not the worst spot. And we also just drew a Monastery Swiftspear. So I actually like attacking with the Swiftspear. If our opponent does opt to block, then we could fire the Lightning Bolt, but it looks like no blocks. So our opponent's just going to take the 1 damage, and then we can follow up with the Kiln Fiend. So despite both of our Thing in the Ices getting Path to Exiled, I think we're in reasonable shape depending on what our opponent has in hand. So we're just going to take the damage here. And we'll see what comes down. It looks like a Siege Rhino, which is pretty good here, actually. So let's see what our opponent's working with here with this Gitaxian Probe. Opponent does only have 1 card left in hand. And we see that it is a copy of Kitchen Finks, and that was a great draw. Great draw step there in Temur Battle Rage, and that may actually mean lethal damage. So, So what we could do here is fire off the Lightning Bolt. So, yeah, we can just go ahead, fire off the Lightning Bolt on our opponent's Tide Hollow Sculler. So let's do that. Now we get the Apostle's Blessing returned to our hand. We can just win with this Kiln Fiend. So we're gonna Apostle's Blessing on the Kiln Fiend. and choose one of the Siege Rhino colors, and then follow up with the Temur Battle Rage. That's going to be a 13-2 double strike, and that's just going to end the game there.